If you talk to me for long enough, eventually it's going to come out that I'm a massive fan of Pikmin. I think these games are fantastic. I've loved them since childhood, and even looking back on them now, I think objectively they are fantastic games. But in these games, you can encounter several different species of Pikmin, and they all have different strengths and abilities that will help you on your quest. But very few people have taken the liberty of ranking these species in a tier list, and the few people who have kind of did a poor job of it, in my opinion. So I'm gonna be the one to make the definitive Pikmin species tier list. Here we go. We're gonna tier all the Pikmin, but before we start, I just need to get a few notes out of the way. 1. These are only Pikmin that you can actually use, so the weird mushroom Pikmin are stupid and don't count. Don't ask me any questions about these. 2. I, of course, am well aware that every single species of Pikmin has its uses, and the game wouldn't be able to be completed without each of them. However, I want to sort of discount that fact when I'm talking about whether they're good or not. Important, all of them are, but useful in other situations, some of them are more than others. Basically, the way I'm going to be ranking these is if you had a choice of which Pikmin types to pick to approach a given situation, how likely would you be to pick specific ones if you had multiple options? So we're going based off things that they can all do, and some can do better than others, not off of the things that you need a specific type for. Alright, we got the scene switched. Got my nerd goggles on, and let's begin. So we're not going to put these on the list in order of the tiers. Instead, we're going to go in order of canonical discovery. So first of all, let's go through Pikmin 1. First, we discover Red Pikmin. Now, Red Pikmin make a solid B tier position. Reds are the best fighters. They have 1.5 times the attack power of all the other species, and you know, you hear that number and you're not thinking it makes a big difference. You think it's just some nerd math talk, but actually it comes really in handy. I mean, that attack difference could very well be the difference between life and death. Think about it. 3 yellow Pikmin is the same thing as just 2 red Pikmin. It takes you, 0.3 seconds to press the button to throw each Pikmin each time. If you do it rapidly, it all adds up, and eventually the reds just end up vastly outpacing the other species. Now, reds are also immune to fire. Now, in the first game, there are fire geysers where you can time carrying treasures through them so that other Pikmin don't get burnt, but reds let you just skirt around that issue, so they're pretty good for that. In Pikmin 2, though, the fire geysers can now be destroyed, not only by reds, but by any species, so it's less of a factor. But they also introduced enemies like the fiery Bulblacks, which can only really be defeated by either throwing red Pikmin at it or luring it into water. So the fire resistance, while nice, isn't the main selling point. The main selling point is the combat power, and having that extra punch just makes them a very good Pikmin to have in your squad. Next, we have yellow Pikmin, and if you notice down here, I have multiple different entries for a couple of the species. That's because they changed between games. I'm also going to put these in B tier. Now, a lot of people think bomb rocks are like super situational and you usually don't use them, but let me tell you, those people are little children. Once you man up and start using bomb rocks and stop being afraid to accidentally explode and kill your squad, if you man up and you're careful about it, you find that they're actually very useful. You can use them in combat to kill tough enemies. If an enemy eats a bomb rock holding yellow Pikmin, it will die on the spot most of the time, so that's pretty nice. They can be used to actually destroy those walls that you can destroy using any Pikmin type, not just the stone walls that only bomb rocks can destroy. So when used properly, I mean, they have a lot of different functions and they're pretty good. Now, yellows also have a higher throw arc than the other species, so in one, that doesn't really come in handy. There aren't a lot of flying enemies in that game, and since this is the Pikmin 1 iteration of yellows, that doesn't really help them much, but bomb rocks are useful enough for B tier placement. Next, we have blues, and they're an A tier. They're really good. They really open up the game once you discover them. Especially in Pikmin 1, where like 80% of the terrain is water. I'm exaggerating a little, but like there's a lot of water in that game, and being able to just run through it with your Pikmin squad is invaluable. Now, I know what you're thinking, but didn't you say that you're only considering things that all Pikmin can do? Which ones are the best at them? Not things that require one species. Going in water requires you to have blues, so why are you ranking them this high for that? They're pretty average otherwise. Well, here's the thing. The ability to go through water is sometimes a necessity, like if there's a treasure in water, but is more times than you realize more of a convenience. For example, there are a lot of bodies of water where you can either go around them, or build a bridge across them, or just go through with your blues and skirt around all that BS. Going through with the blues in those situations is oftentimes the best choice, and they're super, super valuable for that reason. Blues, definitely an A tier Pikmin, no doubt about it. Alright, so that ends it for Pikmin 1. Next we had Pikmin 2, and first you get reds, which we've already ranked. They didn't change in this game at all. And then next up, we have purples. So, unsurprisingly, these are an S tier Pikmin. They are so powerful. So if you don't know, the unique attribute of purple Pikmin is that they're super heavy, and when you throw them, they slam down on enemies, which has a 30% chance of stunning them, first of all. Does a ton of damage. If you throw a bunch of these in rapid succession at an enemy, it's going to go down pretty quickly. And this ability just trivializes a lot of the combat in the game, to be honest with you. And speedrunners agree with me. If you look at speedruns of the game, they use purples all the time to take out enemies, because it's the fastest way to get an enemy out of your way. Just throw a bunch of purples at it, and the problem sort of takes care of itself. As if the combat prowess wasn't good enough, they also decided to make purples have the ability to count as 10 Pikmin for carrying purposes, so you only need 1/10 of the squad size to carry a certain set of treasures. Now, granted, they will carry them very slowly, but getting them moving while your other faster Pikmin are doing other treasures, and then later incorporating those as well, that's a pretty good strategy, and you see a lot of speedrunners doing that too. I'm sure even non-speedrunners can recognize the value of purple Pikmin. They just have such great combat potential that vastly overshadows any of your other combat options. Next, we have White Pikmin. White Pikmin are an A tier. By the way, these tiers are ordered, so they are above Blue Pikmin. So White Pikmin have a bunch of abilities. They can sense treasures underground, which is one of those situations I described where you kind of need one color. I guess from now on I'm going to call those situations Aquaman situations, because like they put that situation in the game so that this type would be useful. And it's all contrived, and it's not an organic, relevant part of the Pikmin's kit that makes them good in those situations. So you have the Aquaman situation of being able to find things underground. You also have the Aquaman ability to take out poison clouds, and they're immune to all poison. Now this is like the worst hazard immunity in the game because almost no enemies even use poison at all. So right now they're looking pretty useless. However, they're fast. That's like the only reason they're so good is because they're fast. And they're so much faster than the other Pikmin. Obviously, a speedrunner's best friend, but even if you're just a casual player, if you just run forward, you realize that only the white Pikmin are keeping up with you, and any Pikmin with flowers on them. Every other Pikmin is like lagging behind. Furthermore, once you get the first speed upgrade in Pikmin 2, white flower Pikmin are the only Pikmin that can even keep pace with you. They're just that much faster than all the other species, and they do everything faster. They carry faster, they technically hit faster, but they do reduce damage, so it doesn't increase their damage per second. However, that is a thing. They're just overall super convenient to have around. They make great workers, and the utility of the extra speed makes them a very worthy A-tier contender. Next, we have the Pikmin 2 iteration of Yellow Pikmin. These guys I'm putting at C-tier. So what changes did they make? Well, no more bomb rocks, which were like the whole point of Yellows in 1. So what gives? Well, they gave them electricity immunity, which is literally an Aquaman situation as described earlier. There are a couple of enemies that shoot electricity, but the attacks are so telegraphed that you can just throw any species at it at the right time and kill that enemy anyway before it's even a threat. Now, I will say, electricity has the unique distinction in 2 of being the only hazard that actually kills instantly. So poison, fire, and water, all these elements, when Pikmin are attacked by them, you can use your whistle and get the Pikmin out of the situation and it'll survive. But if a Pikmin's hit by electricity, it's done for. However, as stated earlier, the enemies that use electricity are not very threatening overall. So in general, like, having yellows just isn't that useful. They still do have the ability to be thrown in a high arc, and in Pikmin 2 there are a bunch more flying enemies that fly above your head and are hard to reach. But that utility isn't enough to say they're on the same tier as Reds, for instance, which are just solid, all-around great fighters, and you always want to have them around. The Yellows don't come close to that, so that's why they're a tier below. Next up, we have an odd one, Bulbmin. Now, Bulbmin, I'll put in A tier. So, obviously, they're like blues, except they have immunity to all the other elements. So, all of the tactical advantages that blues would provide, the ability to walk in water with some Pikmin would provide, also come in the form of Bulbmin. And one of the Aquaman situations that whites can take care of, they can take care of instead. But they can't see underground. They're not immune to every source of damage. They could still be eaten or crushed or killed in explosions. And they have average attack power and mobility, so they don't have any like crazy uses outside of being immune to a bunch of stuff. But being immune to a bunch of stuff is pretty solid, which is why I put them above even White Pikmin, which are immensely useful. They're just not quite as good as purples, to be honest. I'd rather have a bunch of purples than a bunch of Bulbmin in most circumstances, just because being able to defeat enemies with ease is really useful. Alright, so that's it for Pikmin 2. Moving on to Pikmin 3, we have Reds, which, again, unchanged. Then we have Rock Pikmin. Now, here's a take. Rock Pikmin, D tier. They're just not great. I mean, in theory, they're like the new purples, right? You throw them and they have high impact damage, and they're supposed to be good for combat, but they're actually trash at combat. See, one of the unique aspects of Rock Pikmin is that when you throw them at enemies, they just bounce off. They don't latch on. And then after they bounce off, they get up off the ground, run at the enemy, and then lunge at them again. And this whole process not only takes like 8 years, but it also doesn't do much damage on the lunge forward. Reds do 15 per headbutt, Rocks do 20 per lunge, and the lunges take like 8 years compared to a headbutt, which is happening multiple times per second. Like, it's just pathetic. The average Pikmin does 2 headbutts, and they've already outpaced a Rock Pikmin lunge that is still getting off the ground. So Rock Pikmin are only good when they're initially thrown. You can't use them for repeated strikes like you can other Pikmin, which means that if the enemy has enough health, like, it doesn't make any sense to choose Rock Pikmin. In Pikmin 3, swarming is replaced by this charge mechanic, so you have to lock on and then shake the nunchuck and then all your Pikmin will charge at them. Problem is that Rock Pikmin do not do well when they charge. For some reason, the first lunge that a Rock Pikmin does on an enemy only does half damage. Then when they bounce back and then get up and then run forward and then re-lunge again, it does the normal lunge damage. But why'd they do it like that? On top of this all, they're just a hassle to use. Like, if you throw a bunch, they just scatter all over the place, and then you have to call them back and then re-throw them for them to be even effective, because the initial throw does like so much more damage than just letting them attack on their own that it's unviable to do anything else. If you leave them to kill an enemy on their own, like you can with some other Pikmin, they're not gonna be nearly as successful as even a squad of yellows, much less reds. Now, I was trying to look up some data about the amount of damage that things do in Pikmin 3 to try to like mathematically prove that Rock Pikmin are inferior, but I didn't find any solid information. However, just picture in your head, you have a red Bulborb in front of you. Person A has 25 yellows in their party, and then person B has 25 Rock Pikmin in their party. Now, a red Bulborb has enough health to take 25 Rock Pikmin throws exactly to kill. But throwing 25, let's just say you press the button 5 times per second, which is really fast, by the way, takes 5 seconds to kill, versus lock onto the enemy and then swarm them with a bunch of yellows, and it goes down in, I don't want to say less time necessarily, but at least the same amount of time. Like, there's no reason to pick the Rock Pikmin over any other Pikmin, and the reds just make them look like vastly inferior. I just don't see how these are good. They can smash crystals, yes, but like they put them in the game so that Rock Pikmin would be useful. Again, Aquaman situation. So I do think they're D tier. They're kind of useful at times to kill smaller enemies, but any Pikmin can kill a smaller enemy. So what's the point of these? Just poorly designed, I think, overall. Next up, we have yellows from 3. Now, if you're wondering, wait, how on earth are yellows different in this game? They actually added extra digging speed to yellows for some reason. So now they dig twice as fast as the other species, which can kind of make a difference if you're trying to like really optimize your route. But I think in general isn't much of a plus. By the way, Rock Pikmin also have 2 times digging speed, but this is mentioned nowhere in the game. So I'm pretty sure they just accidentally gave this ability to Rock Pikmin. They're technically strictly better than their Pikmin 2 counterparts, so I put them above, but there are 2 things that mean the addition is sort of counterbalanced. The first thing is that electricity no longer instantly kills in 3, so if a Pikmin's struck by an electrical attack or accidentally bumps into an electric gate, they're not terminated like they would be in 2. You can just whistle them and they become unstunned. So yellows lose even that utility that they had. Furthermore, their higher throwing arc, which lets them attack flying enemies a bit easier than the other species, is sort of crowded out by the next species we're about to talk about. So, Wing Pikmin. This is gonna cause some butthurt, I think, but where am I gonna put these? They're a reluctant B tier. A lot of people seem to think that Wing Pikmin completely break Pikmin 3 apart, and personally, like, I just don't see it at all. So the main thing with Wing Pikmin is that they fly. So when they carry objects, they have unique routing, and you can also take them anywhere. Now, being able to go anywhere is why I think, blues are so useful. But with wing Pikmin, they can't actually get at anything in the water, so that's not as good. They can get at things in the air, but like Aquaman situation yet again, and pulling out fluke weeds and reaching certain high places, Aquaman situations. And when it comes down to carrying things with wing Pikmin versus regular Pikmin, yes, the routes can be a lot shorter when you can just hover over everything, but at the same time, with any luck, the wing Pikmin are gonna go right into a freaking spider web, which is like, literally they put in a countermeasure against the wing Pikmin carrying paths. And there's some water enemies that actually can jump out and eat your wing Pikmin. Furthermore, their carrying speed is pretty slow. And the worst cardinal sin of all is that up until wing Pikmin, there were no Pikmin that had a worse combat ability per hit than the default, which is blues, yellows, whites. But wing Pikmin have half of their attack strength, which is just pathetic. If you're fighting an enemy on the ground, you would rather choose any other Pikmin. I mean, you need twice as many wing Pikmin to make up the difference. I just wouldn't choose to do that. Now, there is one little thing they can do, which is why I didn't put them in C tier instead of B tier. And that is, they can make very quick work of the Quaggled Meyerclops boss fight, since they're the only enemies that can charge at things that are above the ground. So, this can also be used against certain other enemies, and it is kind of useful to be able to do this. I just think overall, like, if I'm building my ideal squad of Pikmin, wing Pikmin are not that plentiful in number just for that reason. And all the other utility they provide is questionable at best and inferior at worst. I just don't see it coming out of these poor guys. Now, blue Pikmin, they did technically get an extra ability in 3. They could swim through water now, but to be honest, like, that's a non-factor. They might well have had that ability in previous games. There was just no terrain to, like, see it. So we're just gonna assume they're the same and put them in the same tier. But that's it for the Pikmin 3 story mode. However, in challenge mode, they reincorporated purples and whites, but they sort of changed them. Let me tell you, these purple Pikmin, it hurts to say, but definitely F tier. See, here's the problem. Purple Pikmin were so good because when you threw them, they had massive damage on impact, and they had a stun chance. Now, if you throw a purple Pikmin, it still has a lower arc, because they're still heavy, I guess, but there's like a short delay before they latch onto the enemy, and then after they latch onto the enemy, they have like a little extra delay before they actually start hitting, which is supposed to be for the stun. But in this game, they took away their ability to stun, and they took away the extra impact damage too. And they even took away their attack power. Now they have the same attack power as Reds, which had 1.5, whereas in Pikmin 2 they had 2 times attack power. So they're like worse Reds at combat now. I mean, I'm pretty sure with the extra delays, depending on the enemy, even yellows and blues would be faster than these things. Furthermore, in Pikmin 2, purples were actually immune to being blown away by enemies like the puffy blowhog. They took away this immunity, which you can actually see in one of the challenge mode stages. There's a withering blowhog, and it can blow away purples. So they took away the wind immunity, which like nobody knew about even. Why would you take that away? And the only ability they retained was the fact that they can count the strength of 10 Pikmin, which is like the bottom of the reasons why you would add a purple Pikmin to your squad, to be honest. I mean, they carry very slowly, let's not forget. So whatever extra mileage you think you're getting out of having, 10 Pikmin in one, is really counteracted by the slow speed at which they do everything. Walk forward, they're probably going to be left behind, so they're a pain to use, and what a disaster. Like, it's amazing the difference that you can make by just removing every single thing from their toolkit. Lastly, we have White Pikmin, which were reintroduced in the mission mode of 3. I'm gonna put them... I'm gonna put them here. They're above yellows, I think, because they're still fast. That's their main utility, is they're fast. They can walk fast, they can take things back to base fast. They do everything so much faster than the other species, and that's still true. They took away the poison immunity, I think. Not that there's any poison in this game anymore. They took away the ability to see underground, because there are no underground treasures, so implicitly they can't. And they even took away some of their digging strength for no reason. So basically every Pikmin has normal digging except rocks and yellows, which have 2, and then winged Pikmin have half, which kind of makes sense. I mean, they're winged, they're not used to digging. But then whites randomly also have half, and in 2, they're known for digging up things from underground, so it's kind of a weird thing to give them this debuff. Also in 3, and here's the worst of all, they have the same attack power as winged Pikmin, i.e. half of a normal Pikmin, for no reason. They were fine in 2. They weren't even overpowered. Like, most players wouldn't think them overpowered. Speedrunners would, but you know, they're a special class. Why would you do this? What reasoning could there possibly be to demote them to this level, where I'm now comparing them to winged Pikmin, and I think winged Pikmin are the better option? Like, what were you thinking? Whites and purples, like the top 2, and other than Bulbmin, but we're not gonna, you know, split hairs here. And they're some of the worst now. I mean, I guess they're better than rock Pikmin, but like not even by much. It's just a disaster overall. So anyway, that was the most objective Pikmin tier list I could muster up. I've played through these games numerous times. I've watched other people play them, both casually and speedruns. So I like to think I have some legitimate grounds to make a fairly objective list that actually takes a lot of things into consideration. But if there's anything I missed, or if you disagree with the placement, do argue with me in the comments section, and who knows, maybe you might even change my mind about one of the Pikmin types. You know, there are probably some convincing arguments for winged Pikmin. I just think they're all wrong. Anyway, guys, hope you have a nice rest of your day/night, and I will see you some other time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, since saying that helps for some reason, even though you're on YouTube, so it should be implicit that you're able to subscribe to any channel you come across. Like the video, share it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, I really want to have a discussion about this. I feel like, you know, if I'm missing something obvious, this video is going to look really embarrassing. So please tell me if I am, and I might even remake the whole thing. I don't know.